Before I get into this review, I did want to preface this by saying I know this game is in early access, but I personally don't think that gives it 100% immunity from criticism or feedback on how to make it better. Because if you're like me and you've played Ark before, you know that even after Ark was fully released as a game, it was still plagued by many issues that started out in the very beginning of the game. Atlas is one of those games that players like myself often ask, what am I willing to put up with to have fun? I think it comes down to how willing you are to keep digging through dirt to find that bit of gold, but if you don't know what I'm getting at, let me explain. Atlas is an MMO style survival game made by Grapeshot Games, a child developer studio from Wildcard Studios, the same studio that made Ark Survival Evolved, that came into early access in 2015. Both games are nearly identical in how they play, and this is in part what caused an uproar when Atlas was revealed back in December of 2018. I'll talk more about that later. I've written pages and pages of notes to try and explain my thought process when it comes to Atlas and Ark in terms of how they succeed but also fail miserably. The purpose of this video is to mainly look at Atlas as it is right now and how it will likely fail unless the devs and community come together. My experience with these games have been almost compulsive, especially with Ark, to the point I nearly taken a week off work just to play it more. That's what I get for loving dinosaurs, I suppose. Gameplay is rooted into two main camps, survival and combat. You have health, food, water, stamina, and nutrition levels that need to be topped off in order to stay alive or at least perform optimally. Heat waves and cold snaps also affect your survivability by either draining your water or food levels respectively. Most islands have everything you need for food, and water isn't hard to come by. One of the more tedious aspects of the survival mechanic is needing different sources of nutrition. I can understand implementing this for the sake of realism. You can't survive on just meat, but the payoff for having an equal distribution of nutrients is hardly what I call useful. Players usually circumvent this by purposely killing themselves to reset the levels. Listen, if players are killing themselves because they're not willing to put up with a game mechanic, it should either be redone or taken out entirely. Even Red Dead Redemption 2 had the player to seek out herbs and spices to augment food for additional bonuses and effects. The only thing cooking food in Atlas does so far is boost 2 nutritional stats slightly. Devs, please add more to this mechanic. The other aspect of survival is fighting off wild animals that can attack you if you're not prepared. Combat comes into play here because you have several tools at your disposal: spears, swords for close range, bows and guns for long range, and shields for personal defense. Each one has their use, but most players, especially those who play PvP, will know that fire arrows hold a special spot for being one of the most inconsistent weapons in the game thus far. It can burn in a small AoE for continual damage, as well as damage ship parts, especially if they're burning with an oil jar. I thought the use of bows and arrows to be an odd addition, considering that pirates are not really known for using them. Hell, I don't think crossbows were that common either. With a significant number of players complaining about how unbalanced fire arrows are, Grapeshot listened carefully and removed the fire arrows until a better solution was found. Just kidding, they made bows consume more durability for using fire arrows. I don't want to sound rude, but I think one of the devs at Grapeshot made the fire arrows and pleaded with the higher-ups to not touch his precious weapon because his pyromaniac tendencies wouldn't let him. I get the idea of setting fire to a ship, it makes perfect sense, but the damage is so reliably good at low cost, it's more or less the meta for sinking ships and killing players at the moment. I know it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, but the melee combat is so mundane it defies its own existence. They have a dedicated skill tree for swashbuckling, which I hardly see ever used. Swords and spears come down to mindless swinging and almost no one uses parrying, because everyone is busy spamming fire arrows or offline raiding. With an earlier patch that balanced pistols and armor, there's very little reason to use the flintlock pistols over the carbine or even the blunderbuss. Even more frustrating is how useless firearms feel against wild animals. I know these are primitive firearms, but are you saying that a wolf can survive a metal ball being shot into its brain matter? Even the fire arrows stopped being useful against alphas, which are stronger and have more HP. I remember shooting a level 160 alpha pig in the head with a spear bolt, and it barely took half its health. I'm sorry, but if large weaponry cannot one-shot a meager pig, even if it's alpha, then it's no wonder why players get sick and tired of this constant headache they have to face. There's no real challenge to fighting the animal AI either. Once they're aggroed, you either kite them to a spot that they can't reach you and you pelt them with arrows or bullets, or you stand your ground and swing a pike, or try and dodge while reloading a gun and hope you kill it before it kills you. There's no strategy in having brain-dead AI charge you and hit you until you die, unless you consider kiting a fun strategy. Ship combat is something I haven't had too much experience in, but from what I was able to accomplish solo, the need for crew members is paramount. The AI crew you can hire with some gold is a solo player's saving grace, but the AI sometimes feels like an afterthought. Maybe it's because I haven't spent a lot of time dealing with it, so I won't touch any more on this subject until a later date. The crux of narrative progression in this game is done mainly by finding power stones on certain islands. You would think with larger enemies like the Hydra or Cyclops, they would invest more AI to make these creatures interesting to fight. But alas, they suffer from the same case of charge the player and hit until dead or shoot them with deadly lasers. I want to make a quick point that Wildcard and Grapeshot have a bad habit of showing moments in the trailer that don't translate to the actual game. But I suppose you can say that about a lot of games. They're meant to show the best and exciting parts in the trailer to garner attention and hype. Unfortunately, the trailers are set pieces made to entice you as the player, and that to me is kind of dishonest and comes off as insecure about their own game. It's as if to say, if we show them real gameplay, they may not like it for what it is. Let's get some dynamic shots in the trailer that they'll never see in the game. If it sounds like I'm being overtly negative, I'm trying not to be, but the more I look at Atlas, the more worried I become for the future of this game. Much like Ark, Atlas gives you the ability to tame almost all of the wildlife on the islands. While this seems fine, it leads to the problem of micromanagement of AI. What I mean by this is most players are led to believe that tames are not as important to Atlas as they were in Ark. The dinosaurs lend to your survivability, transportation, and even gathering of resources. The tames you get in Atlas serve the same purpose. They greatly help you survive wild animal encounters, can carry you from one end of an island to another, and several of them can harvest more basic resources than you could ever accomplish on your own. Elephants gather tons of wood while the rhino collects stone and flint like no one's business. I would argue that these tames are essential if anyone wants to speed up their gathering and manufacturing of essential tools. To me, it would have made more sense to have wolves, bears, rhinos, and elephants serve as resources and challenges for the player. What if instead you were able to harvest thick hide to craft stronger gear? Alphas could also give the strongest tier of leather or other material which would make hunting them more rewarding. If you want players to focus on piracy, I would personally only have shoulder mounts, chickens, pigs, cows, bulls, and horses be tameable. If gathering resources by hand with metal tools is too tedious, then maybe they could add another tier. As it stands, there are stone tools and basic metal tools, metal having higher durability and able to harvest more than stone. In Atlas, players are able to make alloy blocks to construct cannons and other structures, so why not have a third tier of alloy tools? They could harvest more with less hits and have the highest durability in order to make up for not having tames. For those who don't know, alloys are ingots that are made in a furnace from a specific recipe depending on what raw metal is used. I want to talk about something positive for a bit, so I want to look at the building in Atlas. It's by no means 100% perfect without flaws, but it has done some things right from its previous iteration. First is how they made all building structures tied to a specific unlock instead of individual unlocks like they had in Ark. It was too easy to waste engram points just to make a house, so I'm glad they put all the structures into an easy to unlock package. They also combined several structures into one that can be toggled by pressing T. This means your wall can be changed to a door frame, a windowed wall, or even a fence. Another smart feature they had the foresight to include was that the structure staying the same. What I mean by that is when you're placing down an item or a structure, the game will continue pulling them from your inventory until you run out or make another selection. This is great because it reduces the time spent having to press corresponding keys to pull out the same building block over and over again. A small but valuable detail is the addition of an axis to building pieces to know the orientation of what you're putting down. You have no idea how frustrating it was in Ark to tell which way a wall was facing. Before, they used a light and dark green color scheme to differentiate inner and outer walls. Everything snaps very clean, so it reduces the chance of making odd deviances in the shape of a build. And foundations stack. Yes, thank you Grapeshot for making a sensible decision. This has made building on sloped areas more tolerable than before. But before I get too schmaltzy here, I will address an elephant on the ship that some of you are probably well aware of in terms of building. A while back, patch v15.61 brought about a few questionable changes. Changes that seem to have little justification and increase the grind for many players. I am of course referring to the additional cost of metal and organic paste to create stone structures. On top of that, they increased the damage of explosives to stone by 2.5 times and increased siege weapon damage by 60% to stone. All the while, wood got a buff to resist siege weapons by 40%. Altogether, this makes stone structures just marginally better than wood, all the while costing more to make and upkeep. If this was a separate upgrade to something like reinforced stone instead, I think this would have been a much better implementation. Maybe at this point you're wondering why I haven't discussed the land claiming system in Atlas. To me, it seems there are a lot of errors occurring due to decay rates, challenging claims, contesting claims, lawless lands, and other factors. Unfortunately, I don't know a lot of details about these issues to discuss them at length, so I will save this for a future video, but I do hope Grapeshot addresses this sooner than later. Offline raiding is another can of worms that I want to toss my 2 cents into. If you're not familiar with how Atlas PvP works, everything you own on the server when you log off exists in real time. As in, other players can come up to your base and blow it up while you're sleeping or at work. This is understandably frustrating, because if you're a solo player or a small group, all your efforts at establishing yourself is gone and there is nothing you could do because you had other obligations. I myself have gone through the same motions in both Ark and Atlas, albeit very brief. I'm not here to claim that I'm an expert at PvP either, but a lot of discontent seems to be, at least from what I'm observing, from small groups or solo players. Suggestions to benefit the solo player are not looked at how they could also benefit the large companies that occupy large areas of official PvP. This video was initially supposed to look at how a survival game like Rust did the survival MMO better than Ark or Atlas. But after many days of reading, taking notes, and discussions with other people who've played those games, I've come to 2 fundamental reasons why Rust, at least in my opinion, is a better survival multiplayer game. The first main reason is that Atlas and Ark are poorly optimized games, and I know that sounds obvious, but it explains why engaging in PvP is a crap show. Not only do you deal with server lag and hacks, but the abysmal rendering distance can put you at a severe disadvantage against, say, a coastal base. By the time it renders into view, you've probably been hit by 5 mortar shots and didn't even know they were there. The other main reason I think people find Ark and Atlas to be insufferable at times is the overall pacing of the game. What I mean by this is how slow it is to gather resources, tame animals, build ships, and move around the world. I'm certain that most players don't have a problem losing as long as everyone abides by the rules of the game, but when Grapeshot is not addressing explicit cheats and hacks, it doesn't put a lot of faith in the players. Much like Wildcard, Grapeshot has been mirroring them in terms of how often they address community feedback, which is not a lot, especially when every month there's usually a theme of several bugs or hacks plaguing the game. Part of me wants to give Grapeshot games the benefit of a doubt that being a small studio makes it harder to answer everything that comes their way. But another part of me feels that they can do better to make the game great by listening to player feedback in depth instead of using their knee-jerk reaction to buffing or nerfing. Maybe there's something else going on in Grapeshot no one outside is aware of, but that's just me speculating. When I started writing this review / first impressions, I knew that I didn't want to do what literally every other YouTuber has done and bash Grapeshot for the asset flip of Ark to create Atlas. It's not to say that I'm 100% okay with this decision, but I do have some input about the situation. I don't believe it to be inherently bad when small studios reuse assets to get a game going. I mean, look at Bethesda and Fallout 76. It's a great time, resource, and money saver, but to many others, myself included, it did come across as being a cash grab, considering the state of Ark. My big concern is if you're not going to try and at least innovate or push the genre forward with the assets you've copied, then I think the consumer has every right to be skeptical and upset. Atlas hasn't done anything much different than Ark. You're still claiming land, grinding for resources, taming animals, engaging in raids, and fighting large AI. The pirate aesthetics are nice, but it feels unfocused, if that makes sense. I think it boils down to the nature of PvP and the large companies that can literally take over a grid. You have flintlock pistols and swords, yet the most effective method is flame arrows and oil jars to kill players and sink ships. Just because you have interesting ideas and assets doesn't mean they'll work the way you envisioned them to work. You nerf one thing, players will find a way to circumvent and find something else more effective. It's one of those things that you find out quick about the players in any game. They'll be one step ahead of you. My recommendation for the devs would probably be radical from what they want, but I will explain my reasoning as I list them here. The first thing I would like them to do is limit the number of claim flags per player and group to about 3 or 5. The issue is that large groups will spam the claim flag all over sections over several grids and claim dominance that chokes out other competing groups. To avoid having a large mass of players and allies bed spawning to one bed, I would also propose a company member limit as well as a limit to how many allies can be friended. It's common for large groups to start migrating to another base if they're called to do so, and it mitigates the travel time by normal means. If this is the case, I would suggest that a bed can only be used if it's been placed by that specific player or increase the timer on the bed. I would imagine having a base filled with dozens of beds to take a hit on server performance, but again, these are just ideas. I know it ultimately doesn't stop a large group from coordinating with one another with the way Grapeshot operates their servers, but this could at least stop or slow down the complete takeover of an island by scouting groups. This next idea would seem too extreme, but I would be in favor of wiping the server on a regular schedule, maybe once a month. This ensures that the servers are kept fresh, old bases are removed for server performances, and no large company can claim dominance forever. To balance this out, it would be a good idea for players to keep their progress of power stones collected, any special skins they unlocked, and to increase the gathering and taming rates. I feel this could create a faster paced PvP that ensures even small groups are not stuck gathering resources all day if they happen to get raided. So to reiterate, I would be more than glad if Grapeshot did a monthly server wipe to prevent server stagnation. Going back to the positive good vibes, I want to touch on sound design briefly. There's not much to note here, but Grapeshot has done a pretty decent job with their ambient sound design. It's not to say I'm a professional sound engineer by any stretch, but a lot of the sounds and music fit the game very nicely. But I did notice a couple of the sounds that they used in Atlas are similar to those found in Ark, though of course no surprise there. The music is very appropriate overall, and I rarely experience any sound glitches or error during my playtime. Similar to when Ark started, Atlas has little in the way of story right now. It's hard to say what Grapeshot will do for the narrative of the game because there's little information given to the player on where to go. The open level concept works in its own way, but it doesn't lend itself very well to guiding players to its end. I'd say that's in part to this being an early access game, but at least in a game like Ark, you had the giant looming obelisks to serve as points of interest for players to go to and start connecting the dots. In Atlas, the only real clue you have is the compass in your inventory that tells you how this compass is a family heirloom with 9 slots. As the game is right now, there's no real point of interest for players to follow. Where do I find the power stones? Is it in buried treasure or at the bottom of the ocean in a shipwreck? Apparently the stones are located on special islands that are swarming with mythical beasts such as Cyclops and Hydras because that's pirate themed, I suppose. The idea is that you need to defeat the island boss, usually a Drake or a Hydra, which again turns into a game of kiting in order to cheese these monsters. Once defeated, you're given a key to the entrance of an artifact chamber. There's not much to say about these caves. They're mostly one huge gauntlet run to get to the Power Stone and not die to a swarm of bats or spiders. The bits of text you do get from the Power Stones are mostly for flavor, but with the way Wildcard handled the story of Ark, I'm actually curious to see what they plan on doing with Atlas. If you're still with me, thank you. I promise to wrap this up very quickly. Despite all my gripes and seemingly endless complaints about this game, I still had fun playing Atlas. Part of it is my fondness for the survival genre. It's the feeling of progression I get from creating tools and weapons in order to go out and explore the islands. That feeling you get from making your first ship is an accomplishment that marks your willingness as the player to explore, fight, and claim new land. It's not to say this game is for everyone, but if you enjoyed Ark, then you'll most likely enjoy playing Atlas for a change of aesthetics. But if you've exhausted the enjoyment and are waiting for more content, then maybe wait half a year or so. They're usually good about adding new features without charging players additional money. I'm sorry if the video was long or if I didn't touch on a specific issue so far. I think I covered most of the main gripes that I had with the game, and I sincerely hope the devs do the game justice and overhaul some of the systems and mechanics. It's one of those scenarios where the ingredients are there, but the incorporation needs to strike the right balance in order to make it work. There's no doubt in my mind that Grapeshot will do questionable things during the early access, but I hope they continue to constantly listen to community feedback and not dismiss it as, oh, they'll get used to it because we have the vision. I hope you guys took something from this rant, but I encourage you to leave comments about your thoughts on Atlas, maybe if you agree or disagree with me, and I'll see you guys next time. Videon Mode, tuning out.